Hello, my name is Adam Richard, and this is part two of Delegating Authority, the benefits of well-executed group work and what it should look like. So today we'll actually be discussing the problems and the dilemmas with group work, but we're just going to recap what we learned last session. So ways of knowing, doing, and being. Every student brings a unique interest, motivations, emotional commitments, and each student values something different about what is worth learning. There are so many benefits of group work, but ultimately the biggest one is when students can explain a concept in their own words, it is the highest level of understanding. We talked about how we need to avoid writing essays or using essays and individual assignments and Chromebook assignments. We need to avoid always relying on those because they're not good for low achieving and less motivated students. And then we also talked about the difference between direct supervision and delegating authority. So direct supervision is when students they work together, but the teacher is there guiding them along and pushing them towards an answer. Whereas delegating authority, we might give them a sample, might say, this is what I want from you, this is the final product, but we let them bring their own interests, motivations, and values into the activity, and they got to figure it out themselves. And we hold them accountable to that final product. So that leads us to part two, dilemmas of group work. So for a moment, we're going to use these three students as an example. You have three different learners in a group. And in this group, they each come with a unique set of statuses, motivations, academic performances. So I want you to, in a moment, discuss with your elbow partner who might be the one of these three to talk the most, who might talk the least, who will naturally become the leader, and why. Keep in mind you have your A student. She is well liked and she's a strong reader. You have a low reader, but he is quarterback of the football team. And then you have your average student who is part of the chess club. So again, talk to your team. Who might be the one to talk the most in this group? Who might be the one that talks the least? And who's naturally going to become the leader? So welcome back. Thank you for discussing what these three students are going to bring to the table and who might naturally talk the most. But now we're going to add a different layer to it. Now we're going to think about this and reconsider your previous conversation with these things in mind. What about their race? Is that going to affect who talks the most? What about gender? Is that going to affect who talks the least? What about social class? What about popularity? So again, you're considering the three students: race, gender, social class, and popularity. Thank you for partaking in that conversation. So what you might have talked about is, yeah, she is the A student. She's well liked. She's a strong leader. She might easily become the leader of that table. However, is her gender going to hold her back? Is she going to let the boys talk more because that's what society tells her? And then we're looking at that low reader. Yeah, he's popular. He's the quarterback of the football team, but is his ethnicity going to hold him back in that group? And then we have that average student who's average, not the best reader, not the best writer or mathematician. He's not very popular, but he is a white male. So is that going to naturally, subconsciously push him into that leadership role based on biases that society grants him? So in Designing Group Work, Strategies for Heterogeneous Classrooms by Elizabeth Cohen and Rachel A. Loden, they discuss the characteristic traits that establish a pecking order in every group. And we see this pecking order displayed at professional developments with adults, and we see that also with kids. So there's a status order that is based on the perception of our peers. So even these three students, when they got into a group together, they started to perceive each other before the conversation even started. So academic status, that's maybe a student who's better at reading and math. And generally, especially in the middle grades, they will take over a conversation. The experts, if it's a math class and that student has an A in math, they always answer those questions. That student might likely dominate that conversation. You also have that peer status, especially in high school. You'll see this more prevalently. Popularity, being street smart, that might easily get them to be the first one to talk and to lead that conversation and contribute the most. And then you also have societal status. So this is social class, who's poor, who's wealthier, race, gender, and all of these contribute to the way students talk more. So someone of a higher social class might talk more because they might feel that that's what they earned. Whereas someone in a lower class might be quiet because they don't feel like their ideas are as valuable. Same thing with race, and same thing happens with gender. Many times, two kids do most of the work while the others have nothing to do. We call this undesirable domination. So we don't want to see two kids take over while two just sit back. But also sometimes a student might be dominating the conversation and the rest of the students aren't really feeling it. And you can always sense that. But then we also have non-participation, where a student might not be participating, and our natural instinct as an educator is, why not? Get in there, come on. When actually they might have tried to participate, but their ideas weren't being valued by the other members. This leads to withdrawal. So sometimes a student might not be able to get their hands on the materials. We can usually see their body language show us that they are physically separated from the group. They might not talk as much, their ideas might get ignored, and this often leads to misbehaviors. So sometimes the teacher mistakes withdrawal and misbehaviors for just not being on task when actually they tried. Their ideas just were not valued by the group members. And the problem is, when the quiet members have the better ideas, everyone suffers at that group because they're not listening to each other. Then also, the first person to participate affects who contributes the most. So if you're that student, or if there's a student who reads the directions, kind of assigns the tasks, it's likely that person is going to contribute the most to the conversation. So we have to really think about the students who don't participate or withdraw often and think, how can we get them to talk first, to participate first, so that potentially they might contribute more of the work that time. And then we have this example of shoot the moon. So there was a study with an interracial group who did not know each other previously. They all got together to play a game. It wasn't an academic task. It was simply just a game that anyone could play. And with the Black students and the white students, what happened was the white students were more active and played more often, or contributed most to the game, whereas the Black students, maybe based on societal status, withdrew. So in the text, it states that in this case, the group used race as a basis for forming expectations for competence in the game. Because in our culture, people of color are generally expected to be less competent in intellectual tasks than whites. These racist expectations came into play in the innocent game of Shoot the Moon. Once this happened, it was very likely that the white students would talk more and become more influential in group decision making than the African American students. And we see this also in academic tasks as well. And then in the next text, the ethics of learning centered the ethics of learner-centered education, dynamics that impede the process by Edmund J. Hansen and James A. Stevens. They discuss some similar problems with group work, but they go on a little bit further. So as educators, a lot of times we care more about the product than the process of getting to that product. And when we do that, our students are also internalizing that the product is more important than the process. No matter how they get there, we value the product more, which really neglects the process, the conversations that happened to get there, who contributed what, how many students tried their best, how many students weren't listened to. We can't always just value the product and put grades based on the product. We have to remember to somehow try and analyze and grade the process. Um, that way, our students value the process, they value talking to each other. They don't just think that when you work as a group, the person who's talking, displaying the knowledge, that's the person who should be valued the most. We want them all to value each other, whether they can articulate their ideas clearly or not. We also have students who are afraid to offend others. This could go with political correctness, this can go with pronouns, but especially in adults and or with adult groups and in high school, as the topics get more complex, um, we might be afraid of offending others, and that might limit what we say to each other. And then you have peer evaluation anxiety. So it's important to evaluate each other. What kind of feedback can we give each other? Because it holds each other accountable to that final product and the grade. But then you might not get an authentic evaluation if there's a fear of retribution. So if a student is afraid that one of the kids at the group might have something to say at lunch, you're not going to get an authentic evaluation from that student. So peer evaluation anxiety is another problem with group work. And then finally, talking to learn, the promise and challenge of dialogic teaching by Lauren B. Resnick and Faith Shantz. So there's this misconception that when kids talk to each other, it's all about displaying knowledge. But dialogue is not for displaying knowledge, as many kids believe. We use dialogic teaching to help students increase their reasoning skills. We give kids a chance to discuss, to debate, and explain their ideas. It's really not about how much you know, but really about how much you can learn and how that conversation changes your idea of things. So we need, as educators, we need to be able to accept fragments because many students right now, especially in group work, the problem is they can't explain themselves fully. Um, they can't articulate their ideas in a clear way. So it might hold them back. So we need to really push that we are okay with fragments. We're okay with Spanish. We're okay with any forms of communication. It's okay if it's a half, I guess, it's not a full thought. It's okay if they just are beginning to explain an idea, but they just can't get the words. And one of their group members jumps in and contributes, or another group member jumps in and finishes that thought for them. That's totally okay. And then the last thing is we really need to push ourselves away from direct instruction. When we only direct instruct, those ideas and skills and concepts are not transferring to the next class, to the next assignment, to the next week. So, really pushing for 90 minutes a week of dialogic group work collaboration. That is about 15, 20 minutes a day if you have a 50-minute, 5 periods a week, right? So we need 90 minutes of dialogic teaching rather than direct instruction. And that concludes Delegating Authority Part 1 and the Dilemmas of Group Work Part 2. Thank you for listening.